in the night of June 7th, 1942, somewhere near the banks of the Volga River. The moon hung low over the frozen steppe, pale and distant, like a single, watchful eye. Below, a thin wind scraped across the earth, carrying the faint rumble of distant artillery. The night was quiet, too quiet, and in that silence, a dozen shadows moved like ghosts. They were not soldiers in tanks nor men in steel helmets. They were women, pilots, dressed in threadbare wool and flight suits patched with rough fabric, their faces pale with frost and fatigue. And their aircraft? Old, fragile biplanes made of plywood and canvas, relics of another era. The Polikarpov Po-2, a machine so light that a strong gust could tip it over, and so slow that the German fighters often stalled trying to chase them. But in these rickety skeletons of wood and wire, the women of the 588th Night Bomber Regiment wrote their legend. Her name was Yelena Mikhailovna Petrovna, 20 years old, once a university student in Moscow studying literature. Now she wore a pilot's cap and a red star pin. As she sat in the cockpit of her biplane, frost crept along the windshield. Her hands shook, not from fear, but from the cold. The Volga's night air bit through her gloves like knives. Behind her, in the rear seat, was Katya Orlova, her navigator and closest friend. Katya had once worked in a bakery. Now she read maps by moonlight and dropped bombs through a tiny hole in the floor. "Altitude steady," Katya whispered over the wind. "Target ahead." Yelena nodded. She could see the faint glow of a German encampment miles away. Trucks lined up like beetles, a few fires flickering. They cut their engines. Instantly, the growl of the plane died, replaced by a deep, terrifying silence. Only the wind whistled through the struts. The biplane became a ghost, a whisper gliding through the darkness. That silence, it was their weapon. From below, the Germans never heard the plane coming, not until it was too late. When Yelena pulled the lever, the small bomb bay released two 50-kilogram bombs. They fell quietly at first, then roared into flame. The ground below erupted, trucks burning, men shouting. Katya shouted over the wind, "Hit! We hit them!" But there was no time to celebrate. Searchlights flicked on, slicing the night. German anti-aircraft guns began to thunder. Tracers arced into the sky, white, green and red lines, like hell's fireworks. "Hold on!" Yelena cried. She yanked the stick, throwing the plane into a dive. The Po-2 shuddered violently, wood creaking under the strain. A spotlight caught them, a brilliant white beam cutting through the dark. "Engine!" Katya shouted. Yelena restarted the motor, the tiny Shvetsov engine coughing before roaring to life. They banked hard left, dropping to treetop level. Leaves brushed the undercarriage as they skimmed the forest canopy, then disappeared into the night. By dawn, the squadron returned to their hidden base, a rough airstrip carved out of the steppe, camouflaged with tree branches and mud. Their commander, Major Raskova, stood waiting. Her uniform was immaculate despite the dirt and cold, her eyes sharp as steel. "Report," she said simply. "Target destroyed," Yelena replied, still trembling. "Fuel depot and 2 trucks confirmed." Raskova nodded once. "Good. You'll fly again tonight." Yelena blinked. "Tonight? But there's no rest, Petrovna," Raskova interrupted. "Every night we fly, the Germans sleep less. That's our victory." Behind her, another plane limped in with a torn wing. The crew inside, 2 girls, barely 18, had to be pulled out, one of them clutching a Lucky Charm soaked in oil and blood. Yelena stared at them, her heart heavy. She thought of her university days, of poetry and books, of hands once soft and clean. Now those same hands were cracked, burned, and covered in grease. They were no longer girls, they were witches, The Germans gave them that name, Nachthexen, the Night Witches. They said their planes made a sound like broomsticks sweeping across the sky when they cut their engines. To be awakened by that whisper meant death. Even hardened Wehrmacht soldiers began to dread the sound. Superstitions spread, and that the witches could see in the dark, that their bombs never missed, that no bullet could hit them. In truth, the secret was much simpler and far braver. The Night Witches flew at treetop height, using the dark as their only armor. They carried no parachutes. Every kilogram mattered for fuel and bombs. Their compasses were unreliable, their maps outdated. When the moon was gone, they flew by the glow of the stars or by memory. Many never returned. One night in late July, Yelena's plane was hit. A burst of flak shredded the lower wing, and smoke poured from the engine. She struggled to keep control, teeth clenched, eyes wide. "Bail out!" Katya screamed. "No parachute!" Yelena shouted back. "We stay together!" They crash-landed in a frozen field miles behind enemy lines. The planes split apart, wood and fabric tearing. Somehow they survived. When dawn came, they crawled from the wreck, shivering and bleeding. German patrols were nearby. They could hear voices in the distance. Katya whispered, "If they find us—" "They won't," Yelena said. "We'll walk back." They trudged for 2 days, through fields of mud and corpses, through rain and hunger, until they reached friendly lines. When they stumbled into camp, the soldiers stared in disbelief. 2 witches returned from the dead. By autumn, their regiment had flown over 30,000 missions. They bombed bridges, fuel depots, and supply lines, always at night, always unseen. Yelena's name appeared in the dispatches. She earned the Order of the Red Banner, though she laughed when she received it. "They give us medals," she said, "because they have nothing else to give." She looked at the horizon, the endless dark that waited for her each night. Somewhere beyond that darkness lay victory, distant, uncertain, but worth dying for. That night, as she and Katya prepared for another flight, Yelena whispered, "Do you ever wonder if we'll see peace again?" Katya smiled faintly. "We are peace, Lena, just not the kind they write about." The engine sputtered to life. The wooden wings lifted into the sky, and once again the witches rose, silent, fearless and unseen, vanishing into the blackness over the Volga. In December 18, 1942, among the ruins of Stalingrad, the city was no longer a city, it was a graveyard made of bricks and smoke. The snow that fell here didn't stay white, it turned black with soot before touching the ground. And somewhere in that endless ruin, one man was being hunted. His name was Otto Brandt, a 26-year-old corporal of the German 6th Army. He had come to Russia believing in quick victory. He had marched east in triumph. Now he crawled through rubble, half frozen, clutching his rifle, whispering prayers to a god who seemed to have abandoned them all. The enemy was unseen, but she was there. The men called her Die, Unsichtbar Hex, the invisible witch, a sniper, a ghost, a whisper. She had already killed 3 of his comrades that morning. One shot, always one. And then silence. Otto pressed himself against a wall that had once been part of a factory. Above him, snow drifted through holes in the roof. The air stank of oil, rust, and death.
"Keep moving!" shouted Lieutenant Kruger from across the street. "We can't stop here!" Otto didn't move. He'd seen what happened when someone tried. Private Schiller, young, foolish, homesick, had lifted his head for just a second. A crack, a puff of dust, and Schiller had fallen back, eyes open, a neat hole through his helmet. Now, no one dared to look up. They had heard rumors about her. A Soviet woman, maybe from Leningrad, maybe from the countryside. Some said she'd been a hunter before the war. Others said she was avenging her husband, shot by the Germans.
They called her Vera Pavlovna, though no one knew if that was her real name. She moved with the wind, one day in a church bell tower, the next in a sewer, always close enough to see your eyes before she pulled the trigger. Otto waited until night. When the sun disappeared behind smoke and snow, he crept out from the wall and crawled into the remains of a burned-out tram. His fingers were numb. He hadn't eaten in 2 days. His water was frozen solid in its canteen. But fear kept him awake. He thought of home, of Munich, of his sister, who sent him letters with pressed flowers between the pages. He thought of her last note, written months ago. "Come home soon, Otto. Don't stay in that cold place too long." He didn't have the heart to tell her that too long had already passed. At dawn the fog lifted, and so did the silence. A single shot rang out. The bullet hit the ground inches from his face, showering him with dust. Otto didn't move. He breathed shallowly, eyes darting across the street. There, a flash of glass in a window across the square. Second floor, factory office. He aimed his rifle, but his hands trembled. The cold made the metal bite his fingers. He exhaled and fired. The sound echoed across the ruins. For a moment he thought he had her. Then another shot. His helmet flew off, the straps snapping across his chin. He dropped back into the snow, heart pounding. She was faster, better, always one step ahead. That night, as he hid in a ruined basement, Otto heard footsteps above, soft, careful, deliberate. Someone was moving through the building. He froze, clutching his rifle. The footsteps grew louder, dust drifted from the ceiling, and then silence. He waited. A minute passed. 2. Then something fell beside him. A scrap of paper fluttering down through a crack in the boards. He picked it up. There were words written in shaky Russian, smudged with soot. He couldn't read them all, but one phrase stood out. "Go home before the spring." He looked up through the hole. There was no one there. The next day, his unit received orders to hold the square at all costs. Supplies were gone, food was gone, and the temperature dropped to 30 degrees Celsius. The Soviets surrounded them completely. The once proud 6th Army was dying, one man at a time. Otto dug into the snow and waited for dawn. When the light came, it revealed a hell frozen solid, corpses buried in frost, tanks half sunk in the ice, crows pecking at the dead. He felt no hatred anymore, only exhaustion. Somewhere out there, Vera Pavlovna was watching. He knew it. Maybe she saw him not as an enemy, but as another doomed soul trapped in this endless machine. That afternoon, his squad tried to retreat to the riverbank. The Soviets were everywhere now, shadows in white coats moving through smoke. Otto fired blindly, retreating behind a wall. His rifle jammed. He cursed, pulling at the bolt. Then he heard it, that single, unmistakable sound, the crack of a Mosin Nagant rifle. He didn't feel pain at first, just a deep, heavy impact in his chest. He fell backward, snow filling his mouth. The sky above him was white, pure, endless white. As his breath turned to frost, he saw her shape through the haze, a small figure in a fur-lined cap, lowering her rifle, eyes calm and sorrowful. She hesitated, as if memorizing his face. Then she turned and disappeared into the smoke. When Soviet soldiers later searched the ruins, they found Otto's body. In his hand was the crumpled note. On his chest, a bullet hole, clean and precise, and in his pocket a photograph of a girl with flowers in her hair. For years after the war, veterans spoke of Stalingrad as the place where time stopped, where even the wind seemed afraid to blow. Among the Soviet units, stories spread of a sniper who fought not for medals or revenge, but to end the killing as quickly as possible. They said she disappeared after the battle, leaving no trace. But sometimes, on winter nights, soldiers swore they could still hear a single rifle shot echo through the ruins, the ghost of Vera Pavlovna, watching over the city she refused to let die. June 4th, 1942, Midway Atoll, Pacific Ocean. The sun had barely risen when the first wave hit, not the sea, the sky. Dark shapes appeared on the horizon, glinting like angry insects in the early light. Japanese bombers, hundreds of them, their engines droning in unison. Below, on the coral airstrip of Midway, Chief Petty Officer Sam "Rusty" Hayes squinted up from the hood of a battered Wildcat fighter, a wrench in one hand, a cigarette in the other. "Hell of a wake-up call," he muttered. Then the bombs began to fall. Sam wasn't a pilot. He was a mechanic. Born in Detroit, raised on factory floors and oil fumes, he'd joined the Navy for adventure, but found himself knee-deep in grease instead of glory. And yet, on this tiny speck of sand in the middle of the Pacific, he was about to fight one of the most important battles of the war, not with guns, but with grit and a wrench. When the first explosions hit the airfield, men dove for cover. Sam didn't. He stayed where he was, pulling the engine cowling off the Wildcat, his movements quick and precise. The pilot, a kid barely 20, ran up shouting, "Chief, we're being bombed!" Sam spat out his cigarette and barked back, "Then you'd better hope I finish this damn carburetor before they finish us." The ground shook as a bomb landed near the fuel depot. Fire rolled through the sand. The air reeked of smoke and burning oil. A nearby hangar collapsed, sending debris flying. Sam didn't flinch. He had one job: keep the planes flying, because if they didn't get those birds in the air, the Japanese carriers would wipe Midway off the map. His hands worked faster than his thoughts. Bolts, cables, clamps. "Give us some throttle," he yelled to the pilot. The Wildcat's engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. Sam slammed the cowling shut, patted the side of the plane, and shouted, "Go! Make 'em pay for breakfast!" The pilot saluted, then sped down the runway, wheels lifting just as another explosion ripped through the edge of the airstrip. Sam ducked, covering his head, as sand and shrapnel rained down. All morning it went like that. Planes came in shot to pieces, bullet holes through the wings, landing gear twisted, engines smoking. Every time, Sam was there. He crawled under wings slick with oil, tore parts from wrecked planes to patch up the ones that could still fly, and used chewing gum to seal holes in fuel lines. Once, he patched a hydraulic leak with a strip of his own sleeve. He didn't think about the odds. He didn't think about dying. He just worked. When pilots staggered out of the cockpits, faces pale and hands shaking, Sam clapped them on the shoulder and said the same thing every time. "Don't worry, she'll fly again." And somehow, she always did. By midday, the Japanese attack slowed. The air was thick with smoke and the ground was littered with wreckage. But on the radio, word spread fast. American dive bombers had found the Japanese carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, 4 giants of the Imperial Navy, and every one of them burning. Sam didn't cheer. He just smiled, greasy and tired, and muttered, "Guess our boys made it." Then he turned back to the next broken plane. Late in the afternoon, a dauntless dive bomber limped back to base. Its right wing was shredded, oil pouring from the engine. The pilot barely made the landing. The plane skidded, spun, and came to a stop upside down. Sam ran toward it, ignoring the flames licking at the fuselage. The canopy was jammed. He grabbed a crowbar, jammed it under the frame, and pried until the metal screamed. He pulled the pilot free, barely conscious, face blackened with soot. "Got you," Sam said quietly. "You're not dying on my runway." He dragged him clear just as the bomber exploded behind them. The shockwave knocked him flat, ears ringing. When he stood again, the world was spinning, but the sky was empty. No bombers, no dogfights, just the quiet crackle of distant fires. That night, as the men of Midway gathered around makeshift fires, someone handed Sam a tin mug of coffee. "You saved a lot of planes today," a pilot said. Sam shrugged. "I just fixed what you broke." The pilot laughed weakly. "Without you, none of us would have come back." Sam looked out over the dark sea, where the faint glow of burning ships still flickered on the horizon. "I just did my job," he said. Then softer. "But I'll tell you this. Next time someone says mechanics don't fight wars, I'll hand 'em a wrench and point 'em at a smoking plane." When the official reports came in, the victory was called miraculous. 4 Japanese carriers destroyed, the turning point of the Pacific War. But on Midway's sand and coral, where the wreckage still smouldered, it hadn't felt like a miracle. It had felt like blood, sweat, and fire. And for men like Sam Rusty Hayes, it was proof that sometimes the smallest hands, covered in oil and blistered from work, could turn the gears of history. Years later, when the war was long over, Sam would return home to Detroit. He opened a small auto garage and hung a sign above the door. It read, "If it's broken, I can fix it. Midway certified." October 2nd, 1943, Warsaw, German-occupied Poland. The piano was out of tune again. The keys had gone yellow, the hammers worn down from years of playing. Not Chopin or Mozart anymore, but marches, German marches. Andrzej Zielinski, once Warsaw's most celebrated pianist, now played for his enemies. In the grand hall of a requisition theatre, German officers sat smoking cigars, their laughter echoing against the walls. Andrzej's fingers danced mechanically across the keys. He didn't hear the music anymore, only the rhythm of survival. Each note was a lie he told to stay alive. When the war began, he'd thought music might save him, that his fame, his art, his humanity would mean something. But art had no meaning in a city ruled by fear. His wife, Elżbieta, had vanished in 1941 during the ghetto purges. His students were gone. Some escaped, most dead. The piano was all that remained, the only thing the Germans had not burned. So he played. And in the silence between the notes, he planned. It began with a whisper, a woman's voice, low and hurried, during an officer's reception. "Tonight at 9, play the waltz in G minor 3 times. He hadn't seen her face clearly, just a flash of auburn hair, a basket of bread on her arm, and a symbol, the Polish resistance emblem, stitched into the lining of her sleeve. He knew what it meant. That night, he played the waltz 3 times. To the Germans, it was music. To the resistance, it was a message. The drop was clear. The courier could move. After that, Andrzej's piano became a weapon. Silent, subtle, deadly. He would lace his recitals with coded signals. A repeated note meant safe. A pause meant danger. Sometimes his left hand would skip a chord, a warning. Each piece became a conversation between him and the unseen network of fighters who risked their lives for Poland's soul. One afternoon, a Gestapo officer came to his flat, tall, neat, cold. "Maestro Zielinski," the officer said in perfect Polish, "we've been told you knew many intellectuals before the war, writers, politicians, Jews." Andrzej's hands tightened around his teacup. "I knew artists," he said softly, "but they are all gone now." The officer smiled faintly. "Yes, gone." He turned to leave, then paused by the piano. "Play something for me, won't you?" Andrzej nodded. He played Chopin, Nocturne in C-sharp minor. The music trembled under his fingers, each note like a heartbeat under interrogation. The officer stood in silence, eyes closed. When it ended, he simply said, "You play beautifully. I hope you keep it that way." Then he left. Andrzej didn't breathe for a full minute. That night, he met the resistance courier for the first time. Her name was Katarzyna. She was young, too young. Her hands shook as she passed him a crumpled scrap of paper. "They're moving prisoners from Pawiak tomorrow," she said. "We need a distraction." Andrzej nodded. The next evening, he was scheduled to play at the officers' club. He wore his best suit, slicked back his hair, and bowed politely when the Germans clapped. He began with Strauss, then Liszt, cheerful, harmless. Then quietly, he shifted. The melody slowed, the tone darkened. He played Polonaise Azdur, a national song banned by the occupiers, a song of pride, defiance. Gasps rippled through the Polish servants in the hall. The German officers frowned, unsure at first, then furious. "Stop! Enough!" one shouted, but Andrzej didn't stop. His hands moved faster, louder. Outside, as the Germans argued, the first explosions tore through the northern wall of the prison. The resistance had struck, right on time. The timing had come from his piano. For weeks he lived in fear. The Gestapo raided homes, arrested anyone connected to the uprising. Andrzej burned his notes, his sheet music, even old letters from Elżbieta. But they never came for him. He kept playing. In the winter of 1944, Warsaw froze under occupation. Food was scarce, morale lower still. One night, Andrzej returned home to find his piano gone, confiscated for official use. He stared at the empty space in his parlor. For the first time, he wept. Then, as if in answer, someone knocked on his door. It was Katarzyna, thin, pale, trembling from the cold. "Maestro," she whispered, "we found your wife." He stared, uncomprehending. "She's alive, in Ravensbrück, but the train leaves in 3 days. We can help you send her something." Andrzej looked down at his empty hands. He had nothing, no piano, no words, only the memory of sound. He went to the theatre, broke in through a side window, and sat at the grand piano under the dark stage lights. He began to play, one last time, a melody that was not for codes or messages, but for her. Soft, slow, full of everything he could not say. He wrote it down on torn sheet music, careful and neat, and handed it to Katarzyna. "For Elżbieta," he said. "If she hears it again, she'll know I kept playing." He was arrested 2 weeks later. A neighbor reported him for sheltering resistance members. The Gestapo took him away in the middle of the night. The last thing he saw as they dragged him out was the empty spot where his piano used to stand. When the war ended, the Red Army liberated Warsaw, or what was left of it. Among the rubble of the old theatre, they found a piano, burned but standing. On its cracked lid, someone had carved 3 words with a pocket knife. "Music never dies." Years later, in a refugee camp in Sweden, a woman with silver hair sat beside a small, upright piano. She placed trembling fingers on the keys and began to play a melody, soft, slow, and full of everything she had lost. Elżbieta smiled through her tears. "He kept his promise," she whispered. April 28, 1945, Dachau concentration camp, Germany. The camera clicked. That small, dry sound, so ordinary, so human, was the only truth left in this place of death. Wilhelm Krüger, SS photographer, lowered his Leica and stared at the scene before him. A pile of bodies, stripped, broken, discarded like objects. The stench of rot hung thick in the cold Bavarian air. He had taken thousands of photographs during the war, parades, speeches, propaganda portraits of smiling officers, but nothing like this, and none that would ever be shown to the Reich. When he first arrived at Dachau, he believed in duty, in order, in what he was told, that he was documenting history, the great work of the Führer. But after 2 weeks inside the camp, something cracked. It happened when he saw a child, no older than 10, clutching a wooden horse as he was led toward the showers. The toy fell to the floor, and the guard kicked it aside. Wilhelm picked it up, almost by instinct. He turned it over in his hand. The child's name was carved into the bottom, Jakob. That night, he couldn't sleep. He set his camera on the table beside his bunk and stared at it for hours. The same lens that once glorified flags and medals now pointed at horror, and he could no longer pretend it was just work. The next morning, he made his choice. He would still take pictures, but not for them. He would take them for the truth. He began carefully. At first, just a few extra frames at the end of each roll, a hidden angle, a face in the crowd, a body not yet burned. He developed them himself in the dark room, copying the official negatives, but keeping one for himself. He hid them behind the wall of the studio, a loose brick marked with a pencil cross. Each photograph was a fragment of the nightmare he could not stop. Each one a silent scream he could not make. One afternoon, his superior, Obersturmführer Neumann, entered the studio unannounced. "Kruger," he said, "the Minister of Propaganda is visiting next week. I want new portraits of the officers, heroic, clean." Wilhelm nodded, heart hammering. "Yes, sir, of course." Neumann's gaze lingered on the drying negatives. "And these?" "Routine," Wilhelm said quickly. "Work documentation for Berlin." Neumann studied him for a long moment, then smiled thinly. "Good man. Keep your eyes open and your mouth shut." When he left, Wilhelm nearly collapsed. He knew one mistake, one wrong photograph, would mean death. At night, he moved like a ghost through the camp. Sometimes he bribed guards with cigarettes to let him near the labor yards. Other times, he climbed through the vents above the infirmary. He captured everything the Reich wanted to erase. The skeletal prisoners, still clinging to life, the guards laughing during executions, the piles of stolen clothes and wedding rings. Each click of the shutter was an act of rebellion. Each frame a bullet made of light. On April 28, 1945, everything changed. Rumors spread through the camp. The Americans were close. The guards grew nervous. Executions increased. The crematorium smoked day and night. Wilhelm knew he was running out of time. He spent the night developing the last roll of film, 36 images that would damn them all. But just before dawn, he heard shouting outside. Boots on gravel, gunfire. Neumann burst into the dark room. "They're coming," he barked. "Destroy everything, now!" Wilhelm froze. The red light glowed dimly against the developing trays. Neumann's eyes fell on the wall, the one with the loose brick. "What's that?" he demanded. Wilhelm forced a calm smile. "A crack. I'll fix it." Neumann took a step closer. "Move aside." Wilhelm hesitated, then reached for the tray of developer fluid and threw it into Neumann's face. The officer screamed, clutching his eyes. Wilhelm didn't wait. He grabbed the canister of film, ran out the door, and disappeared into the chaos. Outside, the camp was erupting. Prisoners were breaking through fences. Guards were fleeing or shooting wildly into the crowd. Wilhelm ducked behind a truck, heart racing. He had to hide the film. If he was caught now, everything would be lost. He spotted a water trough near the crematorium. Beneath it, a hollow pipe. Perfect. He wrapped the film in cloth, sealed it with wax, and shoved it deep inside. Then he ran. He didn't get far. A shot rang out. Pain tore through his shoulder. He stumbled and fell. A young prisoner, his face gaunt but his eyes burning with life, rushed to his side. "You're bleeding," the man said in broken German. Wilhelm looked up, struggling for breath. "The pipe," he gasped. "Remember, the pipe." The man frowned, confused. "Why?" Wilhelm managed a weak smile. "The truth is in there." Then he closed his eyes. 2 days later, the Americans liberated Dachau. The soldiers walked through hell, emaciated bodies, smoking pits, the stench of death. One of them, a war correspondent named Lieutenant Daniel Brooks, spoke Polish. He found the young prisoner by the gates. The man pointed to the water trough. "Pipe," he said. "German man said truth inside." They pried it open. Inside was a small, wax-sealed packet of film. 36 negatives. The images shocked the world. When Life magazine published them months later, they were simply titled, "What One Man Saw." No one ever knew who had taken them. Wilhelm Krüger's name vanished in the records of war, another faceless officer lost to history. But his photographs lived on, displayed in museums, printed in books, shown to generations who would never know his face, only his silence. In 1965, during the 20th anniversary of the liberation, an old man visited the Dachau Memorial. He carried a small wooden horse, faded, cracked, with a name carved underneath, Jakob. He placed it beneath a photo on the wall, a black and white image of a child holding the same toy. The old man closed his eyes. "Danke," he whispered, "for showing the world."